sometimes I was meeting with some people about my storytelling. And whenever I meet with people about my storytelling, I end up hearing their stories. And our first storyteller tonight was telling me her life story. And I said, that sounds like an identity crisis that Memphis needs to hear about. So, Laney Strange, come on up.
That's his job. Yeah. Good job, man. You were just there.
I know. I always forget this.
Thank you. I think that's good.
Good.
All right. So my name is Laney Strange, and this is a story about how one time I turned down a job offer from Google, and now I flip burgers for a living. So this is my identity. I'm a computer scientist. I have been since freshman year of college when I took my first computer science class. Took to it right away, and man, was I driven. I studied like crazy in college. I went to grad school, and I got my PhD in computer science. And I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved solving problems. I loved writing code. I honestly kind of love saying, I'm a computer scientist. Sounds kind of cool. And after my PhD, I wanted to go out and get a job like so many computer scientists do. What was the big dream? It was working in Silicon Valley. So that's what I did. I got a job as a software engineer at Amazon.com. And man, I got to tell you, I was young, just starting my career, and I thought I was living the dream. There I was at Amazon, and you're working with these other computer scientists who are nerdy and awkward, but super smart. And you work on a project, and it goes live, and it's up on frickin' Amazon. My mom uses that site. She's using stuff I worked on. It was amazing. It was everything I wanted it to be. But eventually, I really started to realize that I don't fit in with other computer scientists. First of all, I'm a girl. And that's a thing right there all by itself. So this Amazon office that I worked at, there were around 65 software engineers, give or take, 2 women. The other woman worked on a different floor. So it sort of turned out that on my floor, no one ever used the women's room except me. Which I used to my advantage eventually, right? True story, I actually put my name on the door. Instead of women's room, it actually said Laney's room. And I started like keeping my stuff in there, you know, change of clothes, tampons, anything you want, just in there in the public bathroom. So that was a nice perk. I actually sort of enjoyed that. But in terms of my identity, all this time I had thought of myself as a computer scientist, but really what I was coming to be, both from my colleagues and myself in my own head, is I was the female computer scientist. That's always what I was. I was the only woman on my team. Literally every project I ever worked on there, I was the only girl. Most of the time, every meeting I was in, I was the only girl. So it became part of how I thought about myself. I added this modifier, this qualifier, to who I was. But that's not how I really didn't fit in. How I really didn't fit in was how I thought about being a computer scientist in the context of having a job. So here's an example. One day after work, a few of us were hanging out grabbing a drink at a bar. There were probably like 9 or 10 of us. And a couple of guys were talking about a project. And they were talking as computer scientists do in this really enthusiastic, really specific way about code. And you know, they were going on, oh, I use an object for this, and the library for this, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sort of nodding along going, hi, sounds good, guys, and secretly horrified, because they weren't talking about work. They were talking about coding they were doing for fun. And I could not get my mind around this. Like, they write code all day long, and they go home and write more code, and that's how they like to spend their time. And so, like, you know, these are my work colleagues, and I was still fairly new. And so I'm pretending to go along with the conversation the way that you do, like, yeah, totally, yeah. And eventually, one of my friend, Yusuf, he turns to me and he goes, so, Laney, what have you been doing? Shit. So I sort of scratch my head and I go, well, you know, I've been reading a lot of Harry Potter. Because I think like the 5th book had just come out, and I'm just so totally Hermione. I love the Harry Potter books. And it was the nerdiest thing I could think of. Because I was trying so hard to be a guys who are so nerdy that they want to write code 20 hours a day and not just 10 hours a day. It was the only thing I could think of, the nerdiest thing I could come up with in my head, thinking this will get me accepted by this group. Didn't work. I mentioned Harry Potter, and it was like in those movies, you know, where the music stops in the bar. Like, everyone sort of looks at me like, that's what you do? Right? Because every single one of these guys, every last one, was working on a coding project in their spare time. So at this point, I start to think, I really don't fit in with these people. These are maybe not my people, but I'm still thinking of myself as a computer scientist. And I'm thinking in this very narrow way. What do I do? I'm a computer scientist. I write code. I write code for a living. This is what I do. So in my little naive, tunnel vision way, I think, I know. I'll go and get a job at Google. Because I'm thinking, one software company is going to be so totally different from another software company because it's 10 minutes down the road, I guess. Turned out not to be the case, which I discovered when I went to interview. I go in for the interview, and my first interviewer, you know, he's showing me around, he introduces himself, and he shows me his desk and his workspace, and out there on his desk, he's got this collection of figurines from a cartoon called Robot Chicken, which I had never seen. But it was the exact same collection that my friend Yusuf, same guy from the bar, exact same collection he had on his desk. And I'm sort of thinking, oh man, so I start like looking around, and it was like I had stepped out of the one office, come across Silicon Valley, and walked into the exact same office. It was every stereotype you've ever had in your head. There was, you know, whiteboards with math equations on them. There was a foosball corner on the table. There was discarded free food floating around, and there was a sea of pasty white guys listening to music and hunched over the keyboards doing this, not talking to anyone. A whole sea of them, all guys, in fact, on the floor that I was on. So we go through the interview, and you know, when they come and made the offer, by then I was sort of dreading the idea of working there. It actually sounded kind of awful, so I turned them down. And so now we're coming to the point in the story where instead I flip burgers. So here's how this happened. By the time this was all going down, I was actually working, I had left Amazon at one point, and I was working for a technology nonprofit in San Francisco. And I had a very technically focused job, but for the first time in my professional life, I was working with people who were not computer scientists, which was quite refreshing. You know, I was working with institutional development people, and business development people, and community builders, and all these different personalities and skill sets that you never come across when you're just working as a software engineer with other software engineers. But the best part was that I was working with a VP at this nonprofit, a guy named Billy Bickett, who's now my business partner. And he and I were working together, and you know, we had one of those working relationships where you just really click, and we worked on all these projects together that mostly went really well, and we mostly get along really well. And how often does that happen in life? Not very, or sort of never in my experience. I think I might be a little hard to get along with. But we decided, you know, we really wanted to capitalize on that and go into business for ourselves. And so we decided to start our own startup, Billy and I. And there we were, in San Francisco, where people have startups. But it wasn't the right scene for us. You know, it's sort of like the guys in the bar. The expectations when it's about a technical startup are like, so when are you getting your $10 million capital investment? And when are you getting acquired? And it's like, you know, everybody wants to be the next Facebook or the next Instagram. I'm not aiming that high. I don't want to be Facebook. I want to, you know, do something cool and make a living, but I don't need to be a billionaire just so I can wear a hoodie on TV. So it wasn't the right scene, and so we actually came to Memphis last year to start our business. And you know, we wanted to be somewhere where the concepts and ideas and expectations of what it is to be a successful small business are not totally out of whack, which is what we've been trying to find. And so we're working on these technical and creative projects. And as a startup, you know, it takes a little time to get off the ground. So we wanted to have a side project to bring in a little bit of cash while we're working on the next idea. Because we don't want to go and get the $10 million from the venture capitalist like a San Francisco person. So how are we going to bring in a little bit of money? We started a food truck. It totally made sense. Totally made sense in our head. We actually brought, when we started out, we were totally California food truck. We did like kale and goji berries and avocados and everything like that. And now we actually do a lot of milkshakes and hot dogs. How we ended up there is actually another story for another time. We were just responding to the market. So that's what we do now, and it helps, keep us afloat while we're working on these technical and creative projects. And that's what we've been doing the last year or so that we've been here. And a couple of weeks ago, I got a call from a recruiter at Google, whose job it is to call people up who, like me, who almost worked at Google, and sort of go, so, what about now? And so this guy, Zach, he called me up and said, hey, what about now? And I said, thanks, but no thanks, I'm good. And Zach said, well, that's great, what have you been doing? He said, are you still a computer scientist? It doesn't sound like maybe you are. And I said, oh, yes. I said, yes, I am still a computer scientist. And I said, I teach computer science, which I do at the University of Memphis. And I said, I'm working on these technical and creative projects for my startup. And I said, I flip burgers, also, I'm at a food truck. That's what brings in the money. Then there was a pause, long pause. And Zach eventually said, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say anything like that before. And he said, I think you made the right decision. And I said, yes, I